Hello, my name is Elliot Alexander, and this is a literature review. And this is on the topic of how do social media platforms affect political group polarization. And the first topic, or the first article that I pulled from, was actually a study done, and it's labeled "A Model of Opinion and Propagation Structure Polarization in Social Media." And one of the things that this study does is start out by introducing echo chambers, which is a term used in group polarization, especially online, where basically people um, they selectively listen to what they are exposed to online. And the definition they give is more concretely the term echo chambers refers to the state where online interactions are conducted in a polarized pattern within an online social network. Um, this article also establishes that group polarization thrives on social media. So they do totally put that out there. And they bring up social media stats on people and age groups and stuff like that. But they also bring attention to common approaches that other people have done studies on and stuff in the past and try to come up with solutions. But they decided to come up with a new propagation that's centered around where news propagation actually changes the opinions, and that's the consequence of group polarization is news propagation, and news propagation is supposed to be a group. Let's see, news propagation is supposed to be structurally important to group polarization in their model, and that's supposed to solve the problem if we can solve news propagation. The next source that I used was called Exposure to Opposing Views on Social Media Can Increase Political Polarization. Now, this statement is this title is pretty much their ongoing statement throughout this first abstract, and then once you get later into the paper, they end up pretty much saying that it's non-conclusive. They can't for sure tell you that if you expose yourself to an opposing viewpoint on social media, that it will increase polarization. But they do go through echo chambers. But they do a Twitter bot experiment where basically they send conservatives and Democrats with uh, they sign them up with a Twitter bot, which retweets news articles that are biased towards the opposite viewpoint. And they actually were able to distinguish that Republicans and Democrats react differently and have a different attitude following the exposure to these viewpoints. And again, it proves the difference between the polarization patterns, but they do explicitly conclude that the results cannot be generalized to everything. And there are lots of authors for this one. There's a lot of work put into this particular article. The third one that I decided to come up with was social media and polarization. Now, this one was a fairly simple article. Um, One of the things that they list in just one of the opening statements is one challenge for understanding this issue is how social media affects the equilibrium prevalence in different types of media content. Um, then they go into how there's a difference between mass market and niche market type newses. And mass market news is just the type of news that everybody kind of likes to hear, general updates, and mass events, that kind of thing. Niche market are where you get the more polarized viewpoints. And is what they end up saying is that niche market news is more prevalent when talking about group polarization on social media, especially when you're going and finding these groups that are only posting and responding to other people in that same polarized group viewpoint. Mass market news articles are less likely to contribute to group polarization as a whole. But like I said, some mass market news articles come from biased news programs, so there is a fair amount that they offer in this article about how mass market news does contribute to polarization. But it also blames lobbying as a major cause for polarization. Um, the last article was probably the most general and um, the most hard hitting to my original question, which was how group polarization is affected by social media. And this study was really cool by a bunch of professors and doctorates at Stanford and Brown University. They actually analyzed tweets and put them through a certain amount of software to analyze the group polarization around mass shooting events and how that. But they analyzed linguistic aspects of social media posts by topic choice, phrasing, and other semantic like categories to kind of give the audience an explanation on how people warp news to fit what they want. But this article also addresses race and the race, particularly the race of the shooter, and how Republicans and Democrats actually put different designations to the shooters depending on their race. And most of the time, this article did mention that most of the time, the school shooters or mass shooters or that kind of mass terror event, um, they are given. They're most of the time white, but most of the time when they're white, Republicans will give them a different designation than Democrats. And if they're black, obviously, or Hispanic or Asian, there's different designations that they will give. But I liked this one because it kind of uses school shooting or mass shooting tweets as a more general model for how pop polarization occurs. Like it's a very small example that applies to how every political topic is kind of polarized in the nation because of social media. Um, Now, here's my argument. There seems to be pretty convincing evidence to conclude that social media platforms can induce situations that cause individuals to contribute to political polarization in the U.S. But there could be potentially blinding. There could be a potentially blinding answer lying in the psychological field of study. And the reason why this is my argument and sort of my thesis is because I believe that a lot of the articles that I had pulled up in my literature review have a basis of psychological and social psychological research in the backgrounds, but they kind of fail to try and focus on that and see if they can find an answer within that. They kind of try and beat around the bush and try to point towards news media or they try to point towards other things. But I think that there may be a psychological answer to understand human beings, kind of thing. But anyways, I hope you enjoyed my literature review. Thank you very much for watching.